This is the second part of the video for Chapter 1, The Origins of American Government in your Gateways textbook. This is the video 2 of 2 for this chapter. This video starts right in the middle of page 5, where it says the English heritage and the impact of historic documents. The people living in the 13 colonies were also very influenced by their English heritage. Because of their protected island location, the English developed several traditions different from the rest of Europe. Magna Carta. Back in the early 1200s, King John of England attempted to expand his power so that he could fight his wars in France. John introduced new taxes and forced some of his subjects to give him loans that he never intended to pay back. He also made demands on the church. The king's leading nobles, known as the barons, joined with the church leaders in England's largest towns in an armed rebellion against the king. To end the rebellion, John met with his unhappy barons on the field of Runnymede in 1215. John signed a charter of rights that he granted to his subjects, which became known as Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. Underline or highlight Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Although his main enemies were the barons, King John granted these rights to all free Englishmen, to whom most important rights were these. 1. The king would not imprison or take away property of his subjects without a trial by jury of peers or according to the law of the land. So circle or underline or highlight that. That's one of the main things. The Magna Carta ideas that they gave to our government we have today. And number 2, the king would not impose new taxes without the approval of a committee of 25 barons. So underline or highlight that also. That's the idea of the king not being able to just tax the people for whatever he wants. The people have to get together and agree, 25 of them, to pay the tax. Later, English kings agreed to respect the rights granted by King John in the Magna Carta. These rights became the birthright of all free Englishmen and part of English law. Page 6. At the top you'll see there's a box that says the active citizen. I want you to put a number 2 next to this box, because later on in the week when you have an assignment where you go back and answer these, you need to know that the second question is this box. Just below the active citizen. Parliament. Because of Magna Carta, English kings began calling together assemblies of nobles whenever they needed money. They also began inviting representatives from countries and towns to participate. These assemblies became known as parliaments. To parley means to talk. Parliament developed into two houses. English nobles sat at the House of Lords, while elected representatives from towns and counties sat in the House of Commons. So, because of the Magna Carta, they came up with the idea of Parliament, a group of representatives representing the rest of the people, all deciding whether or not to, in this case, pay taxes. But nowadays, they make up our laws. That's where the idea of, having the two different houses in the legislative branch came from. The Mayflower Compact. In 1607, England established its first permanent colony in North America at Jamestown. 13 years later, a group of pilgrims sailed across the Atlantic to establish a colony where they could worship God in their own way. The pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts. Before leaving their ship, the Mayflower, all the men on board agreed to a set of rules to govern themselves. The agreement the pilgrims signed is known as the Mayflower Compact. I want you to go back and underline that sentence right above that one. It said, before leaving their ship, the Mayflower, all the men on board agreed to a set of rules to govern themselves. Because this is why the Mayflower Compact's important, because it's the first time where everyone gets together and makes up a list of rules and agrees to follow the rules instead of agreeing to follow a king and have the king just tell you the rules. They're making a list of rules together, voting on them, and then all signing them, saying, yes, we will follow. In the name of God, we whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of King James of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, in honor of our country, a voyage to plant the first colony in northern parts of Virginia, do agree and combine ourselves together into a body politic, which is a government made by the community, for our better order and preservation, and to enact and frame just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, and constitutions from time to time, as shall be thought most convenient for general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submissions and obedience. In witness whereof we sign our names at Cape Cod, 11th of November, 1620. This is what they were agreeing. They were saying we're all going to get together and form a government. We're going to make the rules for our government, and we're going to sign this document saying we'll all follow it. We agree to these rules, the Mayflower Compact. Page 7. Sometimes the language of the past can be difficult to understand. In this document, the colonists agreed to combine themselves into a body politic, or a political body, in order to pass their own laws. The signers of the Mayflower Compact further promised to submit to it and obey all laws by the community. With this document, we can see the beginnings of a strong tradition of colonial self-government. This tradition of self-government was further reinforced by the establishment of colonial legislatures, like the House of Burgesses in Virginia, and by the town meetings of New England. So at the top of that side of here, I want you to underline or highlight the word says, with this document we see the beginnings of a strong tradition of colonial self-government. Because this is where self-government began. Instead of having someone tell us what to do, we're being self-governed. We're making up our own government and we're governing ourselves. Below that you see an active citizen box. Go ahead and put a number 3 next to that box. The English Bill of Rights. Back in England, King Charles I attempted to increase his royal power. He imposed new forms of taxes and forced loans, and he tried to rule England without calling for a meeting of Parliament. By 1642, England had fallen into civil war between Parliament and the King. Parliament won the contest and executed King Charles I in 1649. A military leader took control of the English government. When he died, Charles II, the son of the executed king, was restored to the throne. Charles II was a popular ruler, but after his death, his younger brother James did not cooperate with Parliament. James II was overthrown by parliamentary leaders in the Glorious Revolution of 1688. To safeguard their rights from the royal interference, Parliament passed the English Bill of Rights in December 1689. This important document limited the powers of the king and firmly established the supremacy of Parliament. Underline or highlight that sentence. This important document limited the powers of the king and firmly established the supremacy of Parliament. The Bill of Rights also introduced specific safeguards to individual liberties. I want you to underline or highlight that also. The Bill of Rights also introduced many specific safeguards to individual liberties. So it began protecting the everyday citizens, their freedoms, their liberties that they had. A century later, many of the same safeguards were placed in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The English Bill of Rights stated that, if you look at the box on the bottom, members of Parliament had freedom of speech, the king could not collect new taxes without approval of Parliament, the king could not have a standing army without the approval of Parliament, the king had to hold Parliament every year, people had the right to bear arms to defend themselves, any subject could petition the government, and to petition is to write the government for redress of grievances, and an accused person could not be held for excessive bail, nor be subjected to any cruel and unusual punishment. So, those should sound familiar to you, because a lot of those ideas we took and put into our government when we made the United States of America. Page 8. The American Revolution and Thomas Paine's Common Sense. 74 years later, after the French and Indian War ended in 1763, the British Parliament decided to place new taxes on the American colonists to help pay for their defense. The colonists felt that these new taxes were being placed on them without their consent, which means without them agreeing. The cry was heard throughout the colonies that taxation without representation is tyranny. The colonists had clearly been influenced by English traditions and by John Locke's social contract theory. So the colonists, or the people living in the United States before it was the United States, so they were living in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, New York, all those British colonists that were still British citizens, but they were living over here in America. They began to get mad because the king kept wanting more and more taxes from them, more and more money from them, and they didn't agree with it. Parliament, however, felt the colonists were too far away to ask their permission. They tried several different types of taxes, but each one led to an even greater protest from the American colonists. By 1775, fighting broke out between the colonists and Britain. Fighting quickly spread from New England to other colonies. The American Revolution had begun. In January 1776, Thomas Paine, an English visitor to the colonies, published an influential pamphlet. Paine called his pamphlet Common Sense. Paine argued that it was common sense that the 13 colonies should not be governed by a tiny island of Great Britain many thousands of miles away. I want you to underline or highlight that sentence. Paine argued that it was common sense that the 13 colonies, before there were states, but the original states, that they should not be governed by England on that island all the way on the other side of the Atlantic. They were saying that you should have your own government. Based on the Enlightenment ideas, Paine argued that the time had come for the colonists to become independent and govern themselves. Paine wrote that the cost of the colonists' connection to Britain far outweighed the benefits it received. Okay, so down here at the bottom you see the active citizen. I want you to put a number 4 next to that one. This last page is a timeline. It kind of goes over everything we just read about and summarizes it for you. So when you're doing the assignments and you need to go back and look into these, this is a good place to start. Look up what you're looking for, read that little excerpt, and see if you can find the answer there before going back and reading the more detailed part of the text.